Welcome to the IT Matters Podcast, where we explore why IT matters and matters pertaining to IT.
Welcome to the IT Matters Podcast. I am your co-host, Keith Hawkey. Aaron Bach will not be with us today, but we have two special guests on the IT Matters Podcast. I'd like to introduce to you Jesse Erickson, who is a technology advisor at Apkala, and Anthony Kent, who is the VP of IT of 4-County Membership Co-op. Today, really what we wanted to get into was how is technology impacting the electric co-op industry? They operate off a different model than most publicly traded and private organizations. A lot of what Anthony has to deal with is the operational technology aspect, how cybersecurity is impacting his environment, and diving into the details of electric co-ops and what are the trends, what do we see in the future when it comes to technology impacting the industry. Jesse Erickson, how did you meet Anthony?
So first, thanks for letting me jump on the show. This is actually my first time doing a podcast, and so I'm really excited about it. I have provided content a lot of times for some of my partners in other industries that do podcasts, but I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to actually talk. So how I know Anthony. So last year I went to technology conference in Myrtle Beach for EMCs. We went there for Apkala, trying to showcase what Apkala can deliver and how much value we can add for the EMC space. Stayed in contact, and then just recently said, hey, my partner, Keith, he does this podcast based on what you talk about and the things that you post and your content on your LinkedIn page. I think you would be a great asset to this show. And so that's where we are right now. We're going to talk through it. We're going to try to, pull out most of that information from his mind in this short hour that we have with each other. And then hopefully we can, use that to educate the technology, folks out there.
So Anthony, to start off here, we love to get into somewhat of the background of how did you end up where you are? How did you decide to join the electric co-op that you manage the IT environment of? Can you tell us a little bit about your background and your career journey here?
I've always been a techie from a little kid. I remember when I was little, taking apart old boom boxes and putting them back together and trying to put more speakers on them and stuff like that. I've always had a technical inclination. And after high school, I was one of those people that I was not ready to go to college. So I joined the Marines, and I really wanted a challenge and something to help me grow up. And anyways, one of the best decisions I ever made, joined the Marines. Did that for 5.5 years, had a 5-year contract, got involuntarily extended for 6 months due to deployment, all good things that happen. After I got out, I actually started at a software cooperative that served electric co-ops, and it was called Applied Technology Solutions. It's now owned by Meridian Cooperative, or as part of Meridian Cooperative. And anyways, while I was there, we had, I think it was about 40 or 50 electric cooperatives that we served. And for some of them, we were actually the IT department for them, the real small cooperatives. And so I was basically working day in and day out with co-ops, and just got really acquainted with the industry and the folks in it, and hearing more about cooperatives. It's the best business model out there. I'll say that. We can go into that later. After that, I actually took the job as an IT manager at an electric cooperative that we served. It was Buckeye REC in Southeast Ohio, where I grew up. I did that for 3 years, and long story short, wanted to relocate back to North Carolina, where I was stationed for the most part in the Marines, and worked for a while afterwards. So I went back to North Carolina, and I supported the Department of the Navy as a cybersecurity analyst, working for Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Well, at first it was EDS, Electronic Data Systems, Ross Perot's old company, if people remember that. Might be showing my age with that. And then later it was Hewlett Packard Enterprise. But that was really a good stint of my life, and I got to learn a lot. So I don't know, a lot of folks probably don't know it, but the Navy Marine Corps Intranet is the largest network in the world. The only thing that's larger is the internet. So I got to see the largest network in the world, second to the internet, and one of the most secure environments that you can be in. I got to see how it operated. Now, granted, we can't take that scale to anywhere else, because those are multi-million-dollar contracts. And obviously, electric cooperatives, we don't have that type of money. But a lot of the principles I've gotten to take from that and apply it my own way to the co-op world. But anyways, I worked there for 8 years. My wife, she works at Meridian Cooperative. So even when I wasn't working at a co-op, I was hearing about co-ops all the time, just me and her having talks and just knowing a lot of the same people. And an opening, I wasn't looking for a job. I was very content with where I was at, but I saw an opening on LinkedIn for the IT supervisor. And anyways, I was like, let me just see what it's about. Not sure I'll want to do it, but just let's see what it's about. And once I just started talking with co-op people, like it's just that old history and all that work I've done kind of kicked in, and it got my blood pumping, and I was just instantly sold myself within 30 minutes of talking to those folks. Anyways, I got the position, and shortly after I got promoted to the vice president of IT. But anyway, that's how I got started in the industry.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. When I first started talking to folks in the, energy co-op space, I've been a member for a long time. I live out in the country in North Carolina. I still didn't understand, what a co-op's role is,
Yeah.
My life, or how it even functions. So I think for our listeners, can you kind of give us a little bit more of an in-depth background on what the energy co-op is, kind of its mission, and maybe a little bit of the role that technology plays in its operations?
I'm going to be brief, try to summarize it, because there's a long history to electric cooperatives, especially in a nutshell. So I'll just break it down. There's 3 different types of electric utilities. There's the IOU, the investor-owned utilities, such as like Duke or AEP. Obviously, they're owned by stockholders. And then there's municipalities. Mainly what I see municipalities in the smaller towns or small cities. And then there's all the rural area, which no one wanted to serve. And what happened is basically the folks got together and stood up electric cooperatives, partnering with the federal government, with money from the federal government to help finance. But anyways, what we are is, so like for 4 County Electric, we serve about 35,000 folks. And what they are is, they're not our customers, they're our members. So they're member owners. One thing as a member owner, what they get to do is our board of directors that help, governance. They do the governance for the cooperative. They can hire and fire the CEO. The members actually votes the board in. Matter of fact, just last year we had an election, and we had 2 people running. We had a new board member elected. The members here, if they have an issue, they can go straight to the top. They can go straight to the board of directors and communicate with them. The other thing as member owners is, so like the margins that we earn, those are put back. And obviously we got to have cash flow to run, but the excess funds that we get, eventually they are retired as capital credits and given back to the members. Every co-op kind of does it in their own way. And that's something the board of directors guides, when and how that's retired back out to the membership. We're not worried about our stockholders. We're worried about the people we serve. And I think for them, that's the best possible outcome they could get is with us.
That's pretty awesome. The rundown there. Definitely seeing the value in it.
It sounds like you're very much a part of the community. There's democracy and who's running the co-op. You're not only providing electricity and energy and power to 35,000 homes, but you're involved in investing and giving the funds that are in excess back to the community that you serve. I don't understand why this is the model everywhere, Anthony.
Yeah, it's unique. And anyways, it's here to stay, though. I think there's cooperatives in all but 2 states. I could be wrong, but I believe that's the case. There's cooperatives all across, and a lot of folks, like Jesse mentioned, they're not even aware that they're part of a cooperative. But anyways, that's something that anyone should look at. And there's a lot of stuff that they do, and you'd be surprised what they're doing if you dig into it.
I'm already intrigued, and something else I've been intrigued with is your job is to drive the strategy and manage the team that manages your infrastructure from an IT standpoint. What technologies over the past couple years have impacted your role and the IT initiatives of the electric co-op the most that you've seen?
I would say the one that's hitting us the hardest right now, as far as a new technology. Well, I don't know how new it is, but it's new to us, and that's the low code tool sets. We do have one developer in house, but I'll say this: cooperatives. So we're at 35,000 meters. That's typically how electric cooperatives kind of measure their sizes, by meter count. The average across the country is probably about 5,000 or 6,000 meters. So we're actually, there's cooperatives much larger than us, but in a whole, we're really small organizations. But anyway, so most folks don't have a developer, or they don't have a fleet of developers. We're very fortunate to have one. The low code tool set. So in this case, most of it is Microsoft Power Apps and Salesforce. It's allowing folks that, didn't get a CIS degree, one of our system administrators has kind of picked up quite a bit on that, and it's able us to develop custom tools, to help meet our needs. Any company has this, whether you're electric co-op or not, but you're going to have processes that are, ancient, they're decades old, and, really could be revamped and modernized. Our IT department, we kind of stand out as we're not just trying to keep the business running, but we're also trying to improve the business. So we're looking at these processes that are outdated, and a lot of it is brought to us, hey, we're doing this on paper. We'd love to be able to do this on an iPad or do it on a computer, and or not have this interoffice, getting delivered between our districts. There's just lots of things that they're seeing and identifying to us, and we're looking at the technologies that we have and seeing how we can apply those to help streamline or make that process better. The other technology I would say is AI. I think that's the easy answer. I think AI, now I feel like we're just getting into it. It's the early stages of it. We're using the AI tool for our right-of-way management. So right-of-way is like the tree trimming. And for most cooperatives, our biggest cost is going to be power, us purchasing power. But typically one of the next biggest costs is right-of-way, trimming the trees down the lines. And so we're using an AI tool called AI Dash. It's helping us, one, validate our trim cycle. We go on a 5-year cycle for our distribution, and it's helping, is that the best cycle we want to do? And then also there's certain types of trees, and there's certain areas where maybe they've got more moisture in the soil where they're next to a river or a lake or something like that. And the trees grow faster, and, that 5-year cycle might not be fast enough. And with AI Dash, it's identifying this vegetation and basically showing when we should cut it. That's one tool. And then there's the tools that everyone is really familiar with, like ChatGPT. Of course, we're using that. I do say this, AI kind of reminds me of the cloud going back maybe 10, 12 years ago. There were a lot of folks where you were either for the cloud or completely against it. There was no middle ground. And today you'll find everyone's using the cloud, in some shape or form. I see a lot of folks that, don't want AI in their environment. I will say this, you need to have some buffers in place to help protect yourself, protect your data in your organization. But I think AI, I would look at it like the cloud. It's here to stay, and it's going to be a bigger part of the future going forward. We utilize ChatGPT. We're piloting Microsoft's Copilot. I think there's going to be a lot of growth there. Right now, the one use case we're wanting to get out of it is just using it to basically capture all of our meeting. Instead of taking notes, let Microsoft Copilot take the notes and then summarize the meeting and give action items out of it. So we're getting ready to start piloting that. We've got it in place. We just haven't had the meeting yet to test it. But anyways, I'm really looking forward to see what that brings, especially with like data analytics. Just even with ChatGPT, like you can upload, a data set in like a CSV or a spreadsheet. It's amazing the analytics that it can pull from it. It's really going to modernize reporting. It may not be able to do the visualization such as other tools, but as far as just uploading the data set and getting trends and getting stats, we uploaded a fictitious data set to ChatGPT and didn't even realize that we made mistakes on the data entry, and it identified, we basically did flights and travel, and it was actually able to identify, data entry errors, and that couldn't happen. It was like, this person can't be traveling because you haven't traveled on this record, So anyways, it showed trends, it showed anomalies. Anyways, there's a lot of power there. And I'm sure in the future, it's going to do a whole lot more for us.
Yeah, I actually see a lot of, one of the conversations I had when I was down in Myrtle Beach last year was how AI was enabling just usage monitoring by the members, right? And being able to forecast with almost complete accuracy when those peaks and valleys were in power consumption.
Yeah.
And ultimately for a co-op, correct me if I'm wrong, having that type of accuracy in those peak usage moments usually results in a return to the customer at some point.
My understanding is for most co-ops, the cost of power, the cost of electric, us purchasing power, is typically between 60 and 70% of our total cost. I mean, that's the bulk of it. So 60 to 70% of our cost of that, about half of it is demand. It's not just the kilowatt hours. And for those that are in the industry, they'll understand demand versus kilowatt hours. I'm not going to go into that. But yeah, the reducing the peaks, that could save a lot of money, and it's really needed. And co-ops are already doing technologies. There's a thing called conservation of voltage reduction. And what it is when it depends on where you're at, but typically in like the winter, like if you're up north, especially in the winter, during the morning is when everyone's taking a hot shower, turning their heat on, And that's when you're going to use the most electric of the day. And what they found with CVR is that they can reduce the voltage just a little bit where it's still in the thresholds where things don't break, that you can reduce that and it'll actually reduce the power that's needed during that time. So, but yeah, with AI, like I'm sure it's going to take it to the next level.
Speaking of AI, you mentioned earlier that you were testing Copilot. That's brand new for most consumers today. I think it went GA just a couple months ago.
That's one of those things where I've heard a lot of people, they just want to put their head in the sand and don't want it on their network. If you got that mentality, I mean, I could be wrong, but I feel like, people got their phones with them. They're going to get on Chat GPT on their phone. Like they're going to find a way to circumvent that if you're blocking it. The way, I think there needs to be rules and policies in place, but I feel like the best approach is to see what it's about, see how you can apply it, and see what you need to secure on it. And the only way to do that is to start looking at it and testing out that technology.
What are your thoughts on Copilot so far? What have you tested? Do you have any feedback, any success or failure stories?
It's a new product, and I feel like they're still rolling quite a bit out. But I'm a little disappointed so far in just comparing it to ChatGPT as far as the things I've
shots
seen.
Fired.
I think it'll grow out. And the thing is, they're using ChatGPT. Just the way they apply it. There's some things that seem really cool that I have not tested out. So the one thing that's awesome, and this is where you don't want to use ChatGPT, is you don't want to be uploading sensitive data or anything like that to it. You got to really watch what data you're putting into it. But with Microsoft Copilot, and this is the part I really need to test out, and this might be awesome, is you can actually take your files and they can be the source of your data. And, that's your, now don't get me wrong, Microsoft it's my understanding that they're not sharing that out. That's your data. Anyways, need to dig into that further. We're not yet or ready to test that part out. But anyways, that's a huge potential, just to be able to, take a spreadsheet or a Word doc and, be able to use that as a source when you're giving it guidance or giving it the command of what you want it to do.
It's amazing to me the opportunity for productivity enhancement within the workplace. I mean, you were mentioning uploading Excel files and asking ChatGPT questions to draw analysis and to, because before that might take a couple hours out of your day to work through and understand the parallels and the correlations in the data, to be able to extract that within the matter of seconds. That's life changing. That changes what you have time to do, because I know in IT a lot of the times you guys you're in the trenches, you're fighting fires, and you don't have a lot of time to do that strategic work that's so necessary for driving the organization into the future.
I get poked at a little bit a lot of times with like general emails that I'm sending out to all employees. Sometimes I'll go back into my guys' area and they're like, ChatGPT wrote that. I'm like, just something simple. So we knew we had network maintenance from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And I just said, hey, ChatGPT, basically generate an email saying we're doing network. And really, I had to tweak it, of course. You have to review everything and go through it. But it created a very succinct email, and it was straight and to the point, and actually guessed at what systems would be impacted. And I had to tweak that a little bit, but it was pretty unbelievable. It would have took me 20 minutes, 30 minutes to write that email, and it took me 2 minutes to generate it, and it took me 2 minutes to review it and send it out.
Yeah, it allows you to spend the rest of those 16 minutes on something more specific for your job and just enhances productivity.
Yeah.
My previous job, I was a military officer for 26 years, and I would have loved to have that capability at my hands just to manage the sheer amounts of email that kept me chained to a desk.
These phones, they're electronic leashes. If I could just get it to respond to my text, that would be a huge step too.
Yeah. So we talked a lot about AI, right? We talked about some of the other current technologies you are currently using within, the EMC space. One of my questions is, how do you manage and integrate all of that technology? Because I'm sure it comes with its own set of challenges, just the integration alone. And I'm trying to understand what problems you've encountered and how you kind of navigated that challenge.
So there's a lot of challenges for, like, most co-ops are relatively small. I mean, most organizations out there are small. We're not all Hewlett Packards or Cisco's and stuff like that. So we don't have, a bunch of bodies that we can throw at every solution. But specific to AI, I'll say the good part of that is, right now we're not doing any technical restrictions or anything like that. And it's kind of its own tool set. We're really looking forward to getting it integrated into a lot of our systems. Now, like the AI Dash, that was a product we purchased and it's a standalone product. But what we're looking to do is, sorry, this is actually more future stuff I would like to see done. And it's really just communicating with our vendors, though. So we actually had Centurion Cares, one of our vendor for our call center, and they do our IVR. And we were talking about the future and talking about AI. And we really shared a lot of the same thoughts on where this could go. And so for call centers, if you work with a call center, typically it'll record the calls. And then, also the supervisors can jump on a call and kind of silently listen. And if they wanted, they could, do a Teams chat or do some kind of chat and kind of coach them on the side. What we were talking about with Centurion Cares is, wouldn't it be awesome if AI could actually analyze all those call recordings and give us metrics from that, because the text to speech that's available, just getting that integrated to where, it can say how many times did people talk about my power bill was too high, or how many people were interested in solar. Right now we have to manually note all that stuff. And our supervisors don't have the time to listen to every call. That would be impossible. They can only listen to a handful, a week. So to have a tool that could look at all that data and give us all those metrics, that would be so awesome. So I think one of the biggest things is really just working with your vendors, communicating with your vendors, and hopefully you guys share the same dream. In this case, we 100% do. They're already looking into those solutions. The other part I did miss on is the coaching. You could have AI listening to the call and say they bring up solar. Well, it could bring up a cheat sheet of your solar programs and stuff like that. Bring up, they all have notes, but it's going to take them a minute to go find them. And if you could have, it listening in the background and just pre-populate their screen with whatever they're talking about. There's just so much that's possible out there. But I think as far as that, co-ops, we use a lot of unique software for the most part. And with that, I think it's just important that we're reaching out to our vendors and communicating with them, because we've got a lot of things we would like to tackle and accomplish with tools such as AI. And, you got to start having that conversation, make them aware. With the the low code tools such as Salesforce and Microsoft Power Apps, that one we're hitting snags to getting them integrated into our systems. And I'll say this: we're blessed because our CEO and board knows how important IT is, and we have more IT staff than most co-ops our size. We've got 2 folks that know the databases pretty well and can get stuff integrated. So what we've done, and also working with a vendor, we've been able to get data out of other systems and pushed up into Salesforce. We're scrubbing, we're not putting any PII or anything like that, but we're putting the data needed to basically build tools off of and do that. So we're doing energy audits. We've got folks that go out and do energy audits at the home, and now they're able to basically capture that data and notes in there instead of on a piece of paper. They can capture it in Salesforce. And, if someone calls and said they had an issue, and they could see if an energy audit has been done in the past and what the results were, talk to the member about that. There's a million things to do, but for that one we had to have the expertise to be able to get that data out. Sometimes the vendor can work with that. It's just really having the bodies and the capabilities out there. It's hard for co-ops because I know a lot of co-ops, they've got a single individual, and I really don't know how they do it. They really need more support.
Obviously, you have a plan for the future with the technologies that are out there. You have a very healthy conversation with the vendors that you are already partnered with, and you're actually helping them innovate based on use case. So that's tremendous that you have that open line of communication.
I can already tell, Anthony, just based on the IT leaders that I work with professionally, you're ahead of the curve for sure when it comes to finding applicability with the artificial intelligence tools that are available today, and having it land and make impact quickly, but safely as well. There are the precautions that you're taking, and obviously you're achieving results very quickly. I actually have learned a few tips and tricks today just listening to you. So I appreciate you sharing it. I'm sure it's valuable to the audience that's listening today as well. Leading an IT team comes with successes, and it comes with unexpected challenges. I'd love to hear about successes, but I actually personally think that the failures or the mismatched expectations of a certain project going left or haywire. I tend to find those more interesting, and you learn from failures. Do you have any stories that where you had these grand ambitions about a project that you were working on that didn't quite pan out exactly the way you'd planned?
Unfortunately, we have several of those stories.
Yeah, like
Um,
one this morning.
yeah. I'll be generic because this is a trend that we learned, and I mean, just we're all learning. I mean, I've learned a lot in the last 5 years at Fort County. I've learned a tremendous amount. One thing early on that we had a lot of issues with rolling out a new technology or is basically just rolling that out on how we think it should be. And even if that was the best way, if you don't have end user buy-in, that solution is not going to work. This isn't all me. This is a lot of this is my folks. One of the weaknesses we had when I started, one of the things that was brought to my attention was the communication with the IT department. I was told basically it needed to be better. And anyways, and that goes in all areas. That's us communicating with each other and us communicating, with the other folks at Fort County EMC. But we had a few instances where we rolled out a product. We went from the beginning to the end, and we didn't talk to the people using the product until the end. And I can tell you now, after doing it a few times, you never want to do that. I mean, I guess there's probably an instance where you would, but you really need to get those folks involved at the beginning of the story, at the beginning of the project. One, it helps them buy into it either way, just being part of that conversation. They felt like they've been heard and they kind of understand why things are the way they are. Almost every project that we do now, if it's something that we're rolling out that, affects a group or a party, not security, of course, but like rolling out a new product. So we did truck inspections. And this is a success story, but it's because we learned off of previous failures. But with truck inspections, we wanted to go from paper to digital and also do stuff with that data instead of filing it in a box and putting it up in a storage room and never see it again forever. One of my folks, Earl Moore, he's a system administrator. He got the folks at the very beginning and said, how do you envision this? How do you see this? He would meet with those folks like every 2 weeks, every month. Sometimes there's a little bit of lag and, other projects go on. But with having all the people involved in that conversation, this has been a very successful transition. I was told up front that this is not going to work. It's too hard to go from a piece of paper to an iPad because there's too many categories and, all this. We actually made the process better. It's easier. Like the folks, and since we got them involved, it's not only that. I mean, we built a good product, but, having them involved and listen to them, the guys, they think it's a better solution. Like outside of all the extra stuff we got out of it, for them, it's easier to do it on the iPad than it is to do it on a piece of paper. But we've had several instances where, we built that product without, speaking with folks. In the end, either we'd get very little feedback. Basically, what would happen is we get folks that wouldn't use the product. So, we'd spend 20, 40 hours, even more, working on a project. There's no one using it. And I can tell you from a person that works in IT, there is nothing more disheartening to me or to the folks I work with is building, working your butt off and getting a product out there and for it not to be used. It really hurts the soul. A lot of that was our own doing. A lot of that was my own doing. And we've learned to just basically incorporate the folks. Cannot stress the importance of that. You have to do that.
You put the human touch on technology, and really what you did is leadership 101, right? So you create buy-in with the end user. And so, I mean, once you have that, almost every plan you put in place will execute, so that's tremendous that you're able to have that foresight to be able to add the leadership challenge to onboarding new technologies. Looking ahead though, without talking about AI, because I know that you guys are getting ready to roll it, but looking ahead and you can look at the OT space and the IT space, what technology trends or innovations are you kind of most excited for?
OT is moving at a blistering speed. Maybe for large organizations, they're already there, but for a lot of us smaller organizations, at first it was just getting kind of like remote connectivity, being able to remotely control something or turn something off, backfeed an area or disable a circuit so people can safely work on it. That's decades old at this point. People are looking, they're wanting to get analytics. They're wanting to know is this phase out of balance? What's the voltage look like down the line? So really what you start to see with the OT environment, now this is kind of getting to the grid, but you'd see a lot of stuff at the substation. And what we're doing now is we're actually going down the distribution line. We've got all the analytics out of what we want out of the substation. And there's some, we're still working on, but we want to get more analytics. We want to go down, where the members at, where the consumers at, and see what the voltage is like, what's the load like on their lines. We don't roll out something that doesn't have communications or connectivity now. Back in the day, they would just roll something out, a recloser or a breaker, and it wouldn't have no connectivity. You'd have to physically go there, and make those changes. And now, obviously you can still do that. You can physically go there, but we want to be able to do it from the office because it reduces, our response time. And, one of the biggest things, with co-ops, we want affordable, safe, reliable energy. And, the reliability comes into that. We want to, if there is an issue, we want to get the power back on as soon as possible. There's a lot of talk of OT versus IT, and a lot of people probably won't agree with this, but the way I look at it, you're either going to do, this is down the road. This is one of those things where it's kind of like the cloud and AI. Like there's no going backwards. There's only going forwards. And the engineers are wanting more data analytics, everyone's wanting more analytics out of these OT systems. So it's either you're going to have to build that connection into your IT network, or you're going to have to put somewhat like an IT product over in your OT environment. Everyone's got to figure that out on their own. The OT networks, they used to be just kind of like for us, they'd be like the SCADA devices and maybe one server and a couple workstations that could access it. That is the old days. Like things are moving forward. There's a lot more servers, a lot more systems in place.
One of the things that I'm always conscious of is just like critical infrastructure. We live in a dynamic world, and there's state and non-state actors all over the place. We have our grid, is the lifeblood to our, way of life. And so seeing these technologies decrease the likelihood of any, significant issues with it is kind of what I keep paying attention to.
Unfortunately, whether you're opening a hole to the IT network or you're putting another system in your OT, you're adding risk to that environment. You can't eliminate it. You can mitigate it, but you're going to add risk, and what you want to do is you just want to reduce that the best you can. I love the fundamentals. Like I know there's a lot of tools out there and stuff, but if you look at like the Purdue model or the NIST guidance on OT environment, like I would always recommend anyone starting there. And in any application, use that guidance to put that system in place. Once you got the fundamentals, then look at the other tools that can help you out. And I'll say this, there are a lot of new tools coming out for the OT environment. And matter of fact, most of the co-ops in North Carolina have been working together with our statewide organization, EMC, and we're applying for grant money to get some OT tools.
The convergence of IT and OT are going to dramatically impact the security concerns going forward for every organization. It sounds like there isn't an easy way to implement efficiency, whether you're bringing OT into IT or IT into OT, without very consciously considering the potential threat landscape as you do this. I've learned a lot, Anthony, during this podcast. I can probably say the same for Jesse. In closing here, one thing that we like to do is if you could send a message out to an IT leader, fresh on the job, what message would you send to them? What's an important tenet that you live by, or something that you learned that is applicable to any IT leader that's looking to make an impact?
What I would say is sometimes, and everyone that's in IT listening to this knows it, this job, it doesn't matter what your role is, it can be overwhelming. Honestly, I know cybersecurity has been out there, but a lot of it's relatively new to a lot of folks in the industry. A lot of the changes the changes are coming drastically. Try not to get overwhelmed and think about all the things that you're not doing that you should be doing or you feel you should be doing. Focus on improving, year after year, being better than you were last year. You can't tackle these things overnight. A lot of these projects some of them can take years to get to. And I would just say, try not to get overwhelmed, break things down into the smaller bites to where you can handle, and just focus on being better, whether that's with security or technology, being better than you were last year. Just keep moving along. We're all human. We all make mistakes. all we can do is just try to be better than, the next year. I do have something I would like to push to folks outside IT that I think is important to the industry. And this is really to like the CEOs and the senior leadership is, as I've mentioned, a lot of these co-ops, they can have a single person. I've met a lot of these folks. I have been one of these where I was the only person, in IT at the organization. And as good as these people can be, like there is no way they're doing all the fundamentals. There's no way that they're doing least privilege across all systems. There's no way that they're patching every system. Zero trust, they could maybe take a stab at it, but there's no way one individual, even with outsourcing a lot of this, can do. And I guess what I would like to say to the senior leadership, you got to have the IT staff to support your business. To me, it's a cost of doing business. We rely on IT so heavily. You have to protect it, and to protect it, you have to be doing a lot of these fundamentals.
And I couldn't agree more, Anthony. What's a way that our listeners can find you if we have someone that wants to bounce some ideas off of your expertise and your experience? How can our listeners reach out?
Sure. I'm on LinkedIn, of course, and I have a podcast, Off the Wire. And actually, we're going to be in the transition of revamping it a little bit. We were focused on cybersecurity, but we're also going to start looking at technology stuff as well. But Off the Wire or LinkedIn is a good way to find me.
Awesome. Well, we'll include those in the show notes, and really appreciate Anthony, you joined the podcast, and Jesse, thanks so much for being a special guest as well. We will catch you on the next episode. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks, Anthony.
Thanks for listening. The IT Matters podcast is produced by Apkalla, an IT advisory firm that helps businesses navigate the vast and complex IT marketplace. Learn more about Apkalla at opkalla.com.